In week 8, we are supposed to share our course project, and our course project is coming from the business case where a healthy lifestyle advocacy group is building a bike sharing system within a medium-sized metropolitan area. This group has signed a contract with the company to provide the bike sharing technology. These include bike sharing, bike stations, bikes, network equipment, Saver, bike sharing software that automates the process of checking out, returning bicycles, and billing customers. Now, here are the steps that I took in the past 7 weeks in planning and working on this project. First of all, I will explain the steps that I took in working on this project. Step number one was for me to identify the processes of the system. In this step, I identified 4 processes that this system will be performing. Number one is the registration process. Number two is the checkout process. The third one is the bike return process. And the fourth one is the billing process. The registration process allows the user to register themselves and pay a subscription fee. The checkout process is where the user is getting the bike, is borrowing the bike. The billing process, now the time is calculated that the user took, and the billing process, now that's where the user will be able to make payment. From step number one, that's identifying processes, I went through step number two, which is identifying the architecture of the system. In identifying the architecture of the system, I decided that this system will follow the distributed architecture. The reason for the distributed architecture is because the systems, there are minor systems that are located at different places in the municipality, and also the public network will have to be used for all these small systems, the docking stations, to be able to connect to the database that is located at the central location. Now, because of the distribution of the equipment that's all over the city and the type of network that's being used, it makes sense that the distributed architecture be used. The hardware that will be used obviously will be the server that will be centrally located, that will carry the database, the end devices that will be at the docking stations that will enable the users to be able to check out bicycles but also to interact with the system. The software, that's the bike sharing software itself, that will allow billing to happen but will also allow users to be able to check out bicycles. The database will be centrally located and will keep users' details but also the history of their borrowing bikes and payments. Step number 3 was to figure out security, identify security risks, and also suggest security measures. Just like any other system, the system can also be vulnerable to security risks that can affect the availability, the integrity of the data. Now, there are several security measures that I suggested. First of all, there is need for a very good antivirus. Secondly, a firewall is necessary to make sure that our server is kept safe, and also updates need to be done frequently and patching of the operating system and all softwares that will be used in the system. Step number 4 was designing the billing schema. The billing process starts when the user returns the bicycle. So when the user returns the bicycle, the time is recorded that the user returned the bike, and then the station sends the time, the return time, so that it can be compared to the time that the user took the bike, and the total time is calculated. And when the total time is calculated, now the system will check whether the user was subscribed or was not. And depending on that, then the total time calculated will be subjected to the policy of how much the user is supposed to pay, depending on the distance that he took. And the total cost will then be calculated. That is, adding the amount of money, that's the $5 if the user was not on subscription, plus the amount of money that's supposed to pay depending on the distance that the user took. Step number 5 was to design the data structures that will describe the registration and billing process. So I identified 4 tables. The first table is the users table that will have details like the user ID, first name, last name, date of birth, city, subscription, and contact details. The second table is the payment table. This payment table will record details of the payment, that's the user ID, the total cost, the payment method that will be used. The ride ID will also identify the ride itself and the date that the payment was made. And then there will be another table that will describe now the actual ride. That will have the ride ID as a primary key, the checkout time, the return time, the total time will be identified there. That's the return time minus the checkout time. So the total time will be identified, and then the cost of the ride, and then the total cost will also be identified in this particular table. This table will also identify whether the user was subscribed or was not subscribed. Step number 6 was to create tables to describe the current and historical rights of the user. So here I identified 4 tables. The first table is the table that keeps records about the docking stations themselves, that will have station ID, station name, and station location. And the second table that has got the station ID as a primary key. The second table is the one that keeps information about the bikes. So it'll have a bike ID, and then it'll also be able to identify which station that bike is. So the station ID will also be in the table. The size of the bike, the color of the size, and the date that the bike was purchased. Another table will be the borrowed, that will keep records about the bikes that have actually been borrowed. So you have the user ID, the bike ID to identify the bike that has been borrowed, the station ID where the bike is located, the start time, and also the return time, and of course the table for users that keeps the basic information about the user. They'll have the user ID as the primary key and the personal details about the user. So those are the steps that I took. Now, what's remaining? The major tasks that will have to be taken for this project to be completed. The first task I think that is very important is the development task, or the coding itself. So the code needs to be written using Python as one of the major and very famous platforms that's in use today. So this is the most robust part of the system implementation, the coding or the development. After the coding and the development have happened, then the testing will have to happen. The testing is important after coding to make sure that the users can have a feel of the system and they can be able to accept. So user acceptability of the system. It's not important to just develop a system and dump it on the users, but develop a system, get the users to test it, they give feedback, and you can continuously be able to update the system, or to correct or fix the features that from the feedback of the users. After testing, the third stage should be deployment. So the system will be put in the production environment so that the users can start using it, and there is finally continuous maintenance. Maintenance is a continuous process that will keep happening as the user using the system. They keep giving us feedback, and the team will continue making the system better and better, and also patching security and everything else. So this is my project. are the steps that I took in the past 7 weeks to work on the project. Thank you very much.